Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar, Raise Money Now with Virtual Events and Donor Love, brought to you by the Southwest Florida Community Foundation and Network for Good. In just a few moments, we will dive into how the fundraising landscape is changing amidst our current situation, simple tactics to stay engaged with your donors, and creative virtual event ideas that really work. Before we get started, we'd like to go over just a few housekeeping items. If you have any trouble hearing throughout the webinar, try refreshing your page, and we also recommend using headphones and confirming that your volume is all the way up. If you're still having trouble, you can click dial in using phone number in the upper left-hand corner. There's a little box that says listen by phone. Throughout the webinar, you can submit your questions and comments using the Ask the Questions box located on the left side of your screen. And as a reminder, the webinar recording and the slides will be sent to all of the registrants following the training today. I'd like to take this time to invite everybody to join our Facebook group, Nonprofits Unleashed. This Facebook group has over 17,000 members of nonprofit professionals, and it is growing. This is such a great resource to come in, ask a question, look for advice, share ideas. So we'll drop a link to join this group. Again, it's on Facebook. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and pass it along to Trisha Body, Head of Social Impact and Connectivity at the Southwest Florida Community Foundation. Trisha, take it away.
Thank you for the introduction, Amanda. Welcome, everybody. I'm so excited that we have such a great participation list. I think there's about 53 people on right now, which is great. I know several of you attended our last Thrivability last week, which was our peer-to-peer fundraising event as well. And I just wanted to kind of do a brief introduction. I wanted to thank you and just let you guys know that these Thrivability series are really kind of made from the information we're getting from you, the nonprofit community. The survey information that we're getting is indicating that fundraising is a huge need right now, and we are going to continue to try to craft Thrivability capability programs that are for the needs of right now and the needs of our nonprofit community. And I know several of you have been on, so you've kind of heard a little bit about our Thrivability, but we're really excited about launching this. This is something we've been doing for quite a few years. We've been doing it a lot with our grantees, but we're really looking to expand this out into the nonprofit community because we know there's a need and it's a very important thing. And as you know, our mission is to impact regional change, and that mission is something we are driving very full speed with Thrivability. So if you see our surveys, please continue to fill them out if you can. We are using that data to continue to design programs that are best needed for our region. But, mostly I wanted to also just say that, Network for Good has graciously offered to do this free webinar for you guys. They've been a partner of ours for many years. I know there's a couple people on here that have worked with Network for Good, and we're hoping that this will provide some opportunities, some tools, and some things that will be beneficial as we all really kind of navigate this really, crazy time and, a time in which we're all kind of learning together and, we're all on this journey together. And I know we've all heard that, but it's really true. So we really appreciate your partnership. Thrivability is really for the resilience training that we want to create within our region. So we're thankful you're here. And as you know, you can always get a hold of me on my email or give me a call, but we love hearing from you. We are thinking about all of you and all the people you serve, and I hope this message finds you safe today, and I'm just really excited about this presentation. So without any further ado, I want to introduce Rachel, who will be doing much of the presentation today, but please feel free to ask questions and involve yourself in this dialogue, because there's a lot of information, but we want to be able to provide things that are tools that you can use today, tomorrow, and in the future. So please ask away and engage as much as you can. So Rachel, thank you so much for having me today, and I look forward to your presentation.
Oh, thank you, Trisha, and welcome everyone. I'm in Fort Lauderdale, so a little bit east of you, and there's a strange light in the sky. After all the rain we've had, it's a refreshing sign. So I take that to mean we're in for a good weekend. But before we get there, I want to just say how proud I am of you for making time to come and attend today and hone your skills. And I want to promise you it's going to be time well spent. We're going to give you a few ideas, and everything that we share has links built in. So when you get the slides afterwards and you see some of the virtual fundraising ideas, you'll be able to click on the link and it'll take you directly to the campaign. So lots of good stuff here. Just a little bit about me. I have the privilege of being the National Program Director for the Jumpstart Fundraising Program. And as Tricia said, this is a program we've partnered with the Southwest Florida Community Foundation for about 3 years now. And you'll hear more about it at the end. But I have the best job in the world working with nonprofits just like you that are facing immense challenges while they show great courage. So today, I'm going to cover 4 things during this webinar. The first is give you a little bit of an idea of what the new fundraising landscape looks like. We've had a massive disruption with the pandemic and obviously with the economic challenges that are here now and to follow for who knows how long. So the landscape is changing. But if you know how it's going to change, that's really going to be helpful to you as you pivot and figure out how best to engage your donors. That leads me to the second task on the list. Your current donors are your best prospects for raising more money. So I'm going to show you some simple techniques for donor love that can make your donors feel valuable and make them feel like they need to continue investing in the work that you do. The third thing we're going to talk about is virtual events. I'm sure that there are a few of you that have had events canceled, but what do you do to replace that lost revenue? And then lastly, finding new opportunities. What are the new opportunities that this crisis brings that we haven't had a chance to do before? And so without further ado, I would like to hear from you. I'm going to launch a quick survey here to see how many of you have actually considered doing a virtual fundraiser. So if you're thinking about doing one, even if you haven't done it, this is your chance to weigh in. We know that, with programs suspended or closed, many of you may be arts organizations that have suddenly lost ticket revenue, where you don't have income coming in. Maybe you're wondering what the heck you're going to do because your earned income isn't there, your donations are down. And so what do? You have to get creative, right? And so one way to do that is to host a virtual fundraiser. Now, it might seem a little intimidating because it's not something you've done before, but looks like we have 27 folks that have already said that they've considered doing a virtual fundraiser, so that's awesome. And 4 people say they haven't yet. Well, you're in the right place. You might leave a little bit inspired. So one more quick survey question before we move on to the presentation. Do you plan to host a virtual fundraiser in the next 2 to 6 months? If you're planning to host one and you're thinking about, what are you going to need to succeed? Where do I start? I think you'll be delighted with the content that we share today. So I'm going to give it a little more time for the survey results to come in. Looks like we've got a lot of folks that are looking to host a fundraiser in the next 2 to 6 months. So far, 9 of you. That's awesome. We're updated to 17. Great. And 5 of you say you haven't got one planned in the next 2 to 6 months. Don't worry. This information is still going to be ready for you and relevant, because even if you don't have one planned, you're likely going to have to plan one at some point as we get used to the new normal. All right. So first thing I want to share with you is a tremendous word of encouragement. During the COVID crisis, I can't tell you how many nonprofit leaders I spoke to who either said they didn't think it was the right time to fundraise, or their board members didn't think it was the right time to fundraise because they weren't one of those organizations that's providing services now. The truth is, it's a great time to fundraise, even if you're not offering services right now. Give you a little bit of social proof. At Network for Good, we power donations for Facebook, YouTube, Google, as well as our own base of nonprofits that we serve. So altogether, we cut about 250,000 checks a month. And as you might imagine, when you're dealing with that many nonprofits, you can see trends in the online giving data. So lots of good news. In March, donations were up 30% over March of 2019. In April, they were up 75 to 125% over April of 2019. And that was for nonprofits of every mission type imaginable. So you might not be surprised to know that, organizations that were on the 125% end of the spectrum, they tended to be the ones that are, doing direct service, feeding people, helping people with rent, things like that. But even organizations that had programs shut down saw a huge leap. And so that just goes to show you that people are very generous during a crisis, and so it's always a good time to ask. You might be wondering how the pandemic stacks up in terms of previous crises. And when we look at the September 11th tragedy, Hurricane Katrina, and the Great Recession of 2008, which are probably the three largest catastrophes that happened in the last 2 decades, they all are followed a similar trend to what we are seeing now with the pandemic. This little chart helps to explain what that trend looks like. So during the crisis and immediately following, we always see a bump. There's a bump in giving or an increase in giving because donors are feeling helpless or they're feeling compassion. They want to do something to help. And so that period usually lasts 2 to 4 weeks. In this case, it's lasted a considerable bit longer, simply because of the nature of the pandemic. But I would say that we are approaching the end of the bump right now, and we are about to enter what we call the slump. The slump means that donations are going to drop down a bit. How deeply they slump will depend on how engaged your donors are with you during that time. So if you're sending them regular communications, giving them updates about your work, helping them to feel appreciated and making them know that they're making a difference, your slump is going to be less deep or less severe than an organization that does not take the time to communicate with their donors. Following the slump, we get to the surge. And one good thing about the slump that's happening here is the summer months always tend to be very slow months for nonprofits in terms of fundraising. So this is not a bad time to be in a slump because it would be a slump anyway. So what we have to look forward to is the surge. And this is where people start giving again. They have gotten over everything to the point where they've adjusted to the new normal, even if it's not normal. They're feeling a little more secure, a little less stressed out, and so they start giving. So when we look at the timeline for the slump, we estimate that it usually lasts 4 to 6 months, which is a beautiful thing because if we're entering the slump in June, it means by October, November, December, which is peak time for our donations to nonprofits, we should be entering the surge phase. And so this is really good timing for us and good news. So if you're feeling a little discouraged and a little stressed out and not sure how you're going to fund your mission, be encouraged, because if history continues to guide us and this pandemic plays out the way previous disasters have, then we'll be in good shape by year end, at least in terms of being able to raise money from donors. Following the surge, we get to what we call the new normal. And so this will be, early first quarter of 2021. And you'll notice that the new normal still shows higher giving than where we started. And so I want to encourage you that no matter how dim and dismal things seem now, hold on to hope, because if you can make the right moves now, you're going to be just fine. So, what does this new fundraising landscape look like for all of us? One of the biggest changes that you're going to see is that major gift donors are still going to give, but the size of the gifts are going to be smaller. And the reason for this is most major gift donors contribute philanthropic dollars from their investment income. So when the stock market is choppy or down, they'll be a little bit more conservative with their giving. They'll still give, but maybe not quite as much. Of course, you have the exceptions to the rule too. There's always a small percentage of major gift donors that say, you know what, even though things are uncertain, I'm going to increase my giving because people need help right now. So those will be in your portfolio as well, but there are likely to be fewer of the increased giving from major gift donors than donors that give less revenue. One of the next things you can count on is few contributions from businesses. I would be astonished if I received any donations from a business at this point in terms of cash. They may offer you things like gift cards or in kind of some sort, but even that might be a stretch because so many of them are just struggling to stay alive. The third trend that you can expect to see is smaller average gift sizes. So you will still have donors giving, but even in the occasional and monthly donor area, they're going to be smaller. But the good news is that more people will give. So even though the average gift size will be smaller, with more people giving, you can actually raise more money than you traditionally would. So there's lots of good news built into this because the more donors that you have giving and the more donors you're engaging, the more potential you have to upgrade giving. The fourth trend that we've seen is that donors are supporting causes they already are connected to. So this is not the time to go run a campaign to acquire a whole bunch of new donors, so much as a time to reach out to the ones you already have and make sure that they feel appreciated, that you're checking on them, that they understand how you've pivoted your programs, and that they know that their support is still needed. And then the last trend that I want to talk about in this changing landscape is in a time of difficulty with cash flow, donors are willing to make monthly gifts now where they weren't before necessarily. So it's a lot easier for them to commit to giving you $10 a month than it is for them to give you $50 at one time, for example. So if you're not asking for monthly gifts, this is the time to ask because lots of people are open to that. So what do all these trends mean for you? What they mean is that there are two ways to create revenue. One is to really focus on securing your relationships with especially your major gift donors, then making sure you're cultivating relationships with the small donors that we often don't pay attention to because they only give us $25 2 or 3 times a year, and then make sure you are pivoting to virtual events because there's going to be so much uncertainty in the next 12 to 18 months that it's going to be pretty risky to plan an in-person event until there's a vaccine. All right, that brings me to the next level of giving and prioritizing. Many of you may already have what we call an endowment at the community foundation. An endowment is money that is held by the foundation and invested on your behalf, and you get to receive the income and spend it, or you can have the interest add to your endowment. And then you're able to generate sustainable revenue for your organization just by growing the amount of principal that you have managed there. If I could draw a parallel in terms of your everyday life, think of your endowment as a 401k. You're contributing to it, you cannot draw from it, and then you still at least can accumulate money so that when it rains or when you retire, you're able to get help. If you don't have an endowment now, this is the time to actually convince your board to do it because they understand that you're vulnerable. They understand that you need a rainy day fund in a very tangible way that they haven't done before. And so I wanted to talk with you a little bit about what that looks like. There are different kinds of endowments, and not every foundation has every different kind of endowment. So the most important thing for you to do is to connect with Tricia so she can connect you with the staff member that handles endowments at the foundation, and they can walk you through all the different options they have. So just to give you a couple things, we talked about interest income already. Some foundations have quasi-endowments, and what that means is even though you can't withdraw the principal and you can only get the interest income, if you're going through a hard time, like with the pandemic, they allow you to borrow against the principal interest-free. Now, normally, just like in a 401k, they discourage you from doing that because it means you lose out on the investment gains in the stock market as long as you've borrowed the money. But in a time like this, where the stock market is choppy, there are negative returns, you're really not losing a whole lot. So if you haven't thought about it before, think about it now as a long-term strategy for building resilience in your organization. A couple other benefits of having an endowment that you might be interested in. When you have an endowment, it tells donors that they can be confident that you're going to be here 10, 20, 30 years from now. Because if you have put aside money to fund your work in the future, that tells them that you're planning to be around for a long time. And when we think about the competitive fundraising landscape that we're all in now, with many, many nonprofits chasing a limited amount of dollars, that could be the difference between a donor choosing to invest in you or choosing to invest in another organization. Another interesting fact, if you have an endowment at a foundation, it increases the probability that you'll receive major and planned gifts. Part of that is that when you have an endowment, the community foundation's team helps you. And so they have a whole team of tax specialists and accountants and donor services folks that are very skilled in helping you to advise donors. So for example, most of us, when we get to 70 and a half, we are going to have to take what we call mandatory withdrawals from our 401k funds. Otherwise, we face a penalty by the IRS. And so most of us will need that money and have no problem drawing it down. But for people who are very affluent, sometimes they don't want to draw down on that money because they don't want to increase their tax liability in that year. So if you're working with one of the major gifts and planned gifts officers at the foundation, they can help you talk to the donor and show them that if they give their money directly from their 401k to the community foundation to disperse to you, they don't have any tax liability at all, and it helps them to meet the mandatory distribution that the IRS requires. Now, I know this is all really technical stuff when you're thinking, I didn't come here to learn this, I came here to learn about virtual events. The reason I share that story with you is just to let you know that when you set up an endowment, you land up staffing up your organization by having access to all these wonderful, very smart people who know how to get donors to give and give in a way that benefits them. So, with all that said, what do you need to be doing now? The crisis is happening, your programs are suspended or shut down, or maybe you're one of the organizations that's on the front lines where you're so busy you don't have room to breathe. Regardless of which situation you find yourself in, there are three things that you want to do right now. You want to cultivate your donors, engage them, make sure that they feel special. You need to prioritize your outreach so that you're spending your energy reaching out to the people that are going to contribute the most. And third, that you're being smart about leveraging resources that can help your nonprofit even outside of individual giving. So what does that look like? You'll notice here that this slide is divided into two portions. So nonprofits that have programs running now versus those that had to shut down or severely reduce their programming. The reason the cultivation practices are different is because messaging to donors will differ depending on which category you fall into. So if you are having programs running now, then your donors want to know, what are you doing? Who are you helping? What do you need? And you have to tell them why you need the help now, which is really pretty simple. If you don't give now, we'll have to turn people away, right? If you're an arts organization or maybe an after-school program or maybe an animal organization where you can't have all your regular programming going and you haven't been able to pivot completely, your donors still care about you. And they're still going to give to you even if they give to other organizations that are providing services on the front lines. Last week, I was talking with a literacy organization, and they were having trouble understanding how their message would be relevant with donors. And I had to explain to them that for someone who's a former teacher like me, I am interested in funding those nonprofits that are working on literacy because COVID has done two things for me. It's shown me how important it is to have brilliant minds to solve complex problems when they happen. And it's also shown me the inequity that exists in our society. People of color are getting sick and dying at a much greater rate than those who are not people of color. At the end of the day, it comes down to literacy and economics. If you are on the lower income side of the fence, you don't have as good access to information or health care, all those things. And so if you think about it, the root cause of economic issues usually comes down to literacy as well. People who are highly literate usually earn more money and have more income stability in their lives. So for a former teacher like me, while I can appreciate the work that the food bank is doing, I also know that there's no shortage of people that are going to reach out to the food bank and give them money. So as a donor, I am much more focused on those organizations that are going to get left behind unless I support them. Because funding something like literacy or arts is just as important to the long-term mental health and wellness of our society as feeding people now. And so when you're looking at your donors and looking at your work, the key is to figure out which of these two categories does your organization fall into, and then adjust your messaging accordingly. That brings me to the next slide, which is, how do you figure out where to spend your time? There's only one of you, and maybe if you're lucky, you might have somebody else to help you, a volunteer or a board member. But at the end of the day, one of the most difficult things for fundraisers or chief everything officers, as we sometimes call ourselves, is knowing where to focus, because there's an overwhelming amount of work and a shortage of hours in the days to do it. So one thing you should know about fundraising is that 80% of your dollars come from 20% of your donors. So what that means is, if you identify who your VIPs are based on how much they contribute to your organization, and you spend time cultivating those people with high-touch things like phone calls and handwritten notes and wellness checks, things like that, they are going to keep giving and upgrade their giving. And so you will automatically raise more money if you retain all of your VIPs and upgrade them just a bit, even if the other 80% of your donor file doesn't do much. Now, that's not to say you should ignore the other 80%, but for the other 80%, you can use low-touch cultivation practices like email or even a card in the mail that's generated automatically, not necessarily handwritten. I'd like to share a story with you of one Jumpstart grantee out in Colorado that put this prioritizing outreach into action and achieved huge results. So through coaching, their coach advised them to start making wellness checks on their donors. And so all they did was call up on the phone and say, hello, Mrs. So-and-so, you're part of the crew here at whatever the organization was, and crew members stick together. How are you doing during the quarantine? And just from a simple conversation, they stayed on the phone for an hour because this old lady told them she lived alone and she had not had human contact in 5 days. From that, the donor said, oh my gosh, I can't believe that you would spend an hour with little old me out of your day when you have so many other things to do. And she followed it up with a $20,000 check. Now, I can't promise you that every donor you call is going to give you $20,000, but just reaching out and not asking them for anything, but caring about their well-being and the people they love, and showing that kind of appreciation and love is going to pay dividends down the road. It's also a great opportunity for you to mobilize all those volunteers that you have that are benched because your programs aren't running. So imagine if you had a list of every donor that lives alone, whether they're old or young, and you paired them with a volunteer who could call and do a wellness check once a week. Incredible friendships are going to share. But more importantly, from an organizational development point of view, those volunteers are going to be talking with those donors about the great work that you do and how connected they feel and how they love volunteering there. And that is worth more than any letter or email or phone call that you could ever initiate. That brings me to the third strategy that you need to use now, leveraging available resources. So many of you may have applied for the CARES Act or PPP funding, and judging by the statistics that I've seen, it appears that 2/3 of the nonprofits applied for them and received funding. So this is an example of leveraging the resources that are available It's intimidating to apply for money, especially anything to do with government, because it tends to be very complicated. So you need to have a strategy in place for experts that you can turn to help you take advantage of opportunities like this. So in the first round of funding, smart nonprofits quickly hired accounting firms to submit their applications and get them in, and they were funded. The money ran out very quickly, and so when the second round of funding came, other nonprofits got funded. But my point is, don't be afraid to burn money hiring professionals who can help you leverage additional resources. A second source of funding is emergency funding that's offered by foundations. Now, in Southwest Florida, your situation is a little bit different in that although the Southwest Florida Community Foundation receives a lot of emergency funding, they turn it over to the local United Way to actually disperse to the community. So if you haven't talked to your local United Way, talk to them and see how do you get a share of those emergency funds that are there. And then finally, capacity building. You want to make sure that you are investing in your success. Capacity building is nothing more than leadership training. It's things like learning how to raise money. It's learning how to do strategic planning, learning how to measure program outcomes. As you are thinking about how you're going to make your organization sustainable, don't forget that you need to invest in yourself and your staff and make sure that you are all developing and strengthening the skills that you need to operate in this new environment well. So I'm going to pause really quickly. I think we may have some questions. Amanda, you want to tell me if we have any questions? See one here. Noel asked, does that break down particular nonprofit sectors, crisis relief versus hunger versus environment? Noel, I think you may be talking about the distribution of increases, excuse me, in terms of the amount of money that's grown or in giving since March and April of 2019. The 75% to 100% does refer to many different kinds of nonprofits. Those that are doing crisis relief now would be on the higher end, and those that are doing things that have been shut down would be on the lower end. The other statistic that this may be related to is the Pareto principle, or the 80-20 rule. 80% of your donors give you, of your revenue comes from 20% of your donors. So yes, I've seen that apply across segments, so it's not necessarily related to a particular kind of nonprofit. All right, I think we've got those questions here. Let's roll on to the main event. So virtual fundraising ideas. I have to confess that nearly all of these ideas came from our Nonprofits Unleashed group. And then I took the time to curate them and then go find the links to the original sources. So if you go through these and you click on them, you're going to be able to find all the ways that these nonprofits promoted it, and some of them even have webinars. So let's dive into these one by one. We at Network for Good are a really cool company, if I say so myself. This is a humble brag for sure. I don't know too many companies that will literally close down their company for a whole day so that all their employees can go and volunteer together as a team building and do-gooder exercise, which is what we call it. But we do this every year in January, and I had the opportunity to go. It's in D.C., and there was this fabulous organization called A Wider Circle. They really are incredible. They have a huge warehouse, and they accept donations from everything from used clothing to furniture to pots and pans to mattresses. But the cool thing about it is they have a pool of 30,000 volunteers that sort everything that's donated, inspect it to make sure that it's something that is at a quality that you would want to have in your own home, clean it, and then they move it upstairs into what they call the showroom. And when people who are homeless come in, they are assigned a social worker who is known as a personal shopper. And that social worker guides them through the showroom and says, hey, take whatever you need to outfit your house. And so literally in one stop, they can outfit their entire house and get a new start. But as you might imagine, This is a very hands-on environment, and every year they have a 5K race that they run, and it's their main fundraiser. And then COVID hit, and they literally had a few weeks to pivot to a virtual 5K. They raised a ton of money, and it was a lot of fun. They had the ability for you to compete in teams and do all kinds of things. But if you click here on the click here to register, you'll see how they promoted the event and some of the cool things that they did. And this is a very low-risk fundraising idea because pretty much all you need is the technology and supporters that are actually willing to walk. In this case, you were able to walk or run in your own neighborhood with your family, however you wanted to do it, and it was a lot of fun. The second virtual fundraiser comes from this same organization. Not even 3 weeks after their 5K ended, they launched a really cool concept called 30 Days of Dinners. And so the idea behind this is that they ask each of their supporters to host a virtual dinner with their friends and have dinner delivered to their friends' houses. And then they do a Zoom conference, and they have a wider circle staff member or volunteer call into the conference to share a little story and what wider circle does. So this is a great way to get your friends to help introduce you to their friends. And since your friends are paying the cost of the meal, it costs you nothing and there's a whole lot of upside. So talk about a low-risk event with big upside. This is a good one. This next one is my favorite. This particular organization has a cook-off every year, and it's a combination of 5 different chefs from 5 local restaurants. They have an actual event where the chefs compete in person, but they also have a peer-to-peer fundraising component where each chef has to raise money from their network. And the winners are a combination of the tasting scores by the judges and how much money they raise online. Well, in this case, again, it was an in-person event. They had to quickly pivot, and so they were able to do that by using live event tastings broadcasted on Facebook Live. So they had a couple people, to actually do the tasting, but they broadcast everything on Facebook Live. They developed videos and all kinds of winning content that they could do in 3 days, and they raised $13,569. Again, very inexpensive lift. This was a grassroots organization. So unlike Wider Circle, which is a huge organization, this is a tiny organization that does this event every year, and so it's really grassroots level, which I think it makes it very endearing. This particular organization, Friends of Youth, when you click on any of these links, it'll take you to their Facebook page. They had a huge luncheon planned with over 600 guests, a big celebrity guest coming in, and it was just a huge event, and they raised lots of money, usually over $350,000. They had a stretch goal this year of $500,000, and they literally had to pivot in 3 days. What they landed up doing was getting videos recorded, and then they used technology through Facebook Live to stream the event. They reached out to all their sponsors, asked them if they would continue to work with them, etc., and they said sure. And basically, you'll see the numbers right here. They landed up raising $418,000 in net profit. But here's the cool thing. Their profit margin was higher than the previous year because they were able to save on some of the banquet costs. It would have been even higher if they had been able to cancel all the costs associated with the event. There were some that were sunk. But anyway you slice it, it was a fantastic virtual event that didn't last too long and raised them a whole lot of money. Here's a good one for an arts organization. So again, the Washington Performing Arts is a group in Washington, D.C. They have a huge gala every year and very highbrow, fancy tails and dresses and meals. And so literally COVID crisis hit, the mayor shut down the city, and they had 3 days to make the magic happen. And so what they landed up doing was moving their entire event online. The cool thing about this link, when you click on the picture in the slides, it's going to take you to the Washington Performing Arts page, and there's a webinar that they did that's an hour and a half long, and it includes all the vendors and team that worked on pivoting to the virtual event. and they tell you exactly how they did it. So this is a good one to check out if you're in that boat and you need to pivot in your gala. If you're a little more scrappy and you're on the smaller nonprofit side and you don't have one of those fancy schmancy things, but you need something cool and fun, the big quiz thing is a trivia game that you can play with a bunch of different folks at the same time. And so this, again, leads to a link to the big quiz thing page. So if you want to try a trivia night with some of your supporters or have them try it with their friends, this would be a great place to start. This next one is a dance-a-thon. So the idea is just like a walk-a-thon, except you're dancing. And so this organization did a virtual dance-a-thon. And again, if you click on the link, it's going to take you to the link so you can see how they did it. And in the dance-a-thon, they tend to be very successful. They're fun. People love doing it because it's passing time and they're stuck at home anyway. So it's an easy fundraiser to organize and very low risk. This group I'm really, really proud of. They are a Jumpstart participant, and it's Florentine Opera Company. They're located in Wisconsin, near Milwaukee. And they had a whole opera season plan that's now been canned. And so they have pivoted their programs to do something called quarantine opera. And it's pretty clever. They did it the very first week of lockdown. And what they did was they assigned musicians and singers different ones to host each week. So in the beginning, the host mixes a cocktail and shows you how to make their signature cocktail. And then they sing or they play an instrument. And it's just lighthearted, fun, easy lift. And one of the benefits of this is it gives them a way to reach their patrons and donors at a time when they can't have them in the opera house, you know. So it's a way to help enrich people's lives and make them remember you and feel like you're, you know, delivering value even though you're shut down. And then this last one, this is another favorite of mine, and this is another scrappy idea. So this No Limits Cafe, they are a tiny nonprofit run by a husband and wife whose daughter has Down syndrome, and they were concerned that people with disabilities have a 90% unemployment rate. So they started a cafe, and every single member of the cafe staff is somebody that has a developmental disability. And so one of the sad things about this is that they had to close the cafe down because of COVID, so their staff is all at home. But one of the ideas they came up with was, hey, why don't we do a fundraiser so that we can raise money to pay the staff when it's safe to open up again, and we'll be able to have more shifts. And so that's exactly what they did. They were wanting to raise $7,000. If you click on the link when you get the slides and go to Watch Event, it will show you a replay of their entire event. It was kind of patterned off of the Saturday Night Live model. They wove in very clever mission moments. They had their staff talking to donors and giving testimonials, and it was just a really fun, sweet thing. And you'll see they raised $47,000. So we're not talking about small money here. All right, so I've given you a lot of rapid-fire ideas to help you get creative about the kind of event that might be a good fit for you. Let's take a look behind the curtain now and see what does it take to host a successful virtual event. You do need some level of technology. So most of the folks that you see here are using things like Instagram TV or Facebook Live or Zoom or Microsoft Teams or something like that. But you have to have a way to be able to connect with your audience remotely. The next two things you need are online giving pages. So that means you need a donor management system that allows you to create online giving pages, event ticketing pages, things like that, and also the text to donate feature. So in every single one of these successful fundraisers, when you go look at them, the most successful ones had a text to donate option, so that during the event, it was very easy for people to give, because the MC could say, hey, text this word to this phone number and to give, and it loads the donation page so that people can give right away in the moment while they're feeling good. And then the third thing that you're going to need here is multi-channel communications tools. So what does that mean? You need a way to communicate with people by email, whether you're using a donor management system that has it built in, or you may be using something like Constant Contact or MailChimp. You do need to be able to communicate via social media. And if you can communicate by text and direct mail, that's all the better. So the more ways you have to get your message out, the more successful you're going to be. A few strategies that are helpful. It's helpful to have a host or an MC that kind of keeps things moving along, so you don't have to worry about who's going to say what when. The MC kind of takes care of that, much like Amanda took care of things at the beginning of this webinar when she introduced Tricia and then Tricia introduced me. The MCs really help to, not only stay organized, but to create excitement in the event. So that's a really good thing for you to have, especially if it's somebody bubbly and passionate, because that's infectious. The second thing that's really helpful is when you can have videos about your impact. So when you have videos that are powerful testimonials, you can plan out what kind of messages you want to share, what kind of behind-the-scenes look into your work donors might be interested in. And the more you can share videos like that, the more engaging it's going to be for participants. The third tip that we have is make sure you're using live speakers. So if you have everything recorded, it's not going to be terribly engaging. But if you have the ability to have some live people coming along, whether they're speaking or dancing or giving a testimonial or introducing somebody else, it just makes the process a lot more interactive. Your text-to-give process, you want to share with them how that works. For some donors, it may be new to them, especially if they're older donors. But if they're younger, of course, they may know it automatically, but we can't make assumptions. So when you're using the text-to-give call to action, you want to make sure that you're explaining to everybody how it works. And then make sure you have a way to recognize donors as they give. So, if you have a thermometer or a wall where you can put up who's donated, peer pressure is a wonderful thing, and people love to see their name in lights. So find a way creatively to do that. You can also give shout-outs on social media as well. So I know I've thrown a lot out at you, so let's sum it up with everything that I've said. It can be boiled down to these few slides. The first is that, every crisis brings opportunities, and the bigger the crisis, the bigger the opportunity. So what are the opportunities that we have now? The first thing is, and I know you guys have lots of galas in Southwest Florida, eliminate inefficient fundraising methods. So I will confess that I like galas when we do a good job of converting gala donors into regular donors. I'm not such a fan of galas when all we do is reach out to them at the event and forget about them until the next year. Because galas that don't have cultivation and engagement opportunities for donors continuing on after them tend to be very inefficient. They take months and months and months to plan, and then the profit margin tends to be very slim because the event costs are so high. You've got to have a venue and the food and the entertainment, and everything adds up. So this is the time for you to take a look at all the different ways that you raise money and see which are the things you really would love to kill because they don't work very well or they're very time intensive for little reward. And then make that play to your board and say, look, we want to experiment with a new approach. We want to try a virtual event. And you may find, most likely you'll find, that your virtual events are going to be way more profitable for a heck of a lot less work, and then you'll be able to eliminate those inefficient galas forever. So, this is the time to experiment, be creative, and everybody's doing it, and nobody's an expert. So don't feel like you have to know everything that you need to do in order to do it. Just dive in, do your best, and make sure people have fun, because when they have fun, they don't notice the things that don't go right, The third big opportunity in this crisis is this is the time when people are going to understand it's an all-hands-on-deck approach that's needed. So it's a great time for you to engage more people in fundraising. So your program directors, your volunteers, your board, they're going to be more willing to get involved now because they feel needed. And if you can find creative ways to not only get them involved, but to help them succeed, then you have a real shot at making fundraising everybody's job instead of just your job. And so the more you can do this, the better off you're going to be long term. And then finally, the last opportunity, I think, is we have a tremendous opportunity to reset board's expectations around a lot of things. First is board giving. You know, this is the time if you have a give and get policy and people don't give, or if you don't have a give and get policy and you have board members that don't give, this is the time to turn that ship around. You need to make the strong and compelling case to them that we need your gift to stay alive. And so this can be a great way to turn a board that doesn't like to contribute financially into a giving board. And once they give the first time, it's a lot easier to get them to give that next gift. It's also a terrific opportunity to help your board have a long-term and strategic vision. So if they have resisted setting up an endowment before because they were afraid you're going to ask them to raise money to fund it or give money themselves, you know, this is the perfect time to bring that up. You know, if we had an endowment, we would be protected against some of the downside that we have now. Hint, hint. You know, so be bold, be creative, and most of all, be hopeful, because there are a lot of good things that are going to come out of this challenging time. And the difference between who survives and who thrives is going to come down to your creativity. And you're lucky in that you have a wonderful partner in the Southwest Florida Community Foundation that's providing a huge number of resources to help you. And I encourage you, all of you, take advantage of them, because all the time you invest now in fundraising is going to pay off at year end when 70% of donations are made by individuals to nonprofits. So I've done too much talking. So before I dive into the next section with additional resources, I wanted to ask you another survey question, not only to make sure that you're not sleeping, but also because Southwest Florida Community Foundation is really trying to gather feedback on how these webinars are going and how helpful they are, because we want to make sure that we're providing content that is making a difference in your life. So for this question, we have a scale of 1 to 5. How helpful was today's program? 1 means not helpful, and 5 is extremely helpful. So, you know, let us know what you think. So far, so good. Thank you for all those who rated this extremely helpful and helpful. We're doing pretty well there. We'll keep gathering those poll results, and I will quickly move on to the next. Actually, before I move on to the next slide, let me leave it open for a little longer so you can answer. I'm going to switch and give you a preview of the next question that we're going to ask so that you can get ready for it. So as the Community Foundation plans for future trainings, we want to know what kinds of topics you need help with most. And so in this next question that I'm going to shoot out to you, we're asking you to put a check mark next to each of the topics that you want to learn more about. And again, the reason for this is that this Community Foundation is going to take a look at all the input and feedback that you give, and they're going to be able to see which topics are the most needed and then plan resources around those as well. So while you are all responding to that particular question, which may take a little longer, I'm going to tell you about some additional resources that might be helpful for you as you navigate this new normal. I'm not a fan of tooting my own horn, but I wanted to share this book with you because I've coached more than 500 nonprofit organizations through the Jumpstart program. And last year, it occurred to me how many of the things that I share with every different organization that comes to work with me. And so I put all of my 4 decades of fundraising experience into a book, and here it is. It's called No More Duct Tape Fundraising. I'm told it's a catchy title. I can't claim credit for it. It was given to me by one of my mentees. But this book really is a primer on helping you to figure out what are all the different sources of revenue that are available to you, and then how do you build a robust individual giving program that's going to compel people to give. It's available as a Kindle book on Amazon right now, and in mid-June it will be out in softcover. So if you're a print person and you prefer to hold the book like I am, you only have a couple more weeks to wait before it's available. in addition to those resources, we referenced at the beginning of the call the Jumpstart program, and you've heard me talk about all the Jumpstart grantees. So I wanted to share with you a little bit about Jumpstart so that you can see if this might be a good opportunity that you're interested in. So Jumpstart is a year-long fundraising program, and so basically what happens is each nonprofit in the cohort is matched with their own personal fundraising coach, and that coach is guiding you through the process of fundraising all year long and training your team, basically. We meet via Zoom, which all of us are probably Zoom experts by now, and so you can meet by Zoom, you can have as many people in the call as you like, so this is a great way to not only learn yourself, but to include volunteers and board members and junior staff members that might make good fundraisers one day so that lots of people get training. Just to give you a little idea of what it's like, Jocelyn Jones was one of the first people I coached in Jumpstart 6 years ago. At the time, she was a brand new executive director for an after-school program on the west side of Chicago for kids that had experienced trauma through gun violence directly. When she came on board, she knew nothing about fundraising, and we worked together for a year, and Jocelyn was able to even win a $300,000 major gift with a little coaching. So, the coaching really is there to help you figure out not only what you should be spending time on, but who you should approach and how you make an ask in terms of major gifts. So what happens to nonprofits that work with a coach? We have found that when they work with a coach and they participate in Jumpstart, they raise 27% more than they did the previous year from individuals. So we're not talking about corporate sponsorships or, ticket sales. We're talking about actual donations from individuals. So I won't go through every detail on this slide, as you can peruse at your leisure later. But basically, you meet with your coach twice a month to develop the fundraising strategy. The second part of Jumpstart is Network for Good Donor Management System. And this is a platform that's really easy to use. In fact, we call it the Simple Smart Fundraising Software because it's so easy to use that if you took all of our trainings to become an expert in this, it would take you less than a day. We built it that way because we know that one of the main pressures that we have as Chief Everything Officers is time. So, the more time you need to put into something, the less likely it is to get done. So the software is structured in a way that it not only saves you time in terms of acknowledgments and things like that, but it also helps you to get more organized and stay on task. And the software includes all of the tools and tech tools that we referenced as needing for virtual events to be successful. So we have the email designer, we've got direct mail built in, we've got the text to give and text to pledge and online giving pages and just about everything you could possibly need. Speaking of fundraising pages, we have 3 different kinds of fundraising pages. You can have peer-to-peer fundraising, event ticketing, or what we call the everyday giving page. They're all optimized so that donors complete the process all the way through the end. So what does that mean? It means the software senses whether somebody's coming in on a tablet versus a mobile phone versus a laptop or a desktop, and it loads the appropriate version of the page. It also doesn't ask for any of the information that you don't need. So if it's a tribute gift, unless you choose tribute gift, you won't see all the other fields asking for who should we send notification to, only if the donor chooses that. So by asking for the minimum information to process a gift, we're able to convert the highest percentage of those transactions. So I've shared a lot with you now. What do we do next? So I know I've shared a little bit about Jumpstart, and I do have 3 quick survey questions to ask you with, but let's talk about what comes next. If you think that you would like to have a personal fundraising coach by your side and Simple Smart Fundraising Software to help you raise money, click on the link under line 1 there when you get the slides. It's a very short survey of 20 questions, and based on the answers to those questions, we can tell you whether you would be a good fit for the program or not. Second, if you didn't have a chance to answer all of the survey questions in the presentation, please go ahead and click here and take the Thrivability survey. It's exactly the same questions. So if you answer them all during the session, you don't have to do it. But if you missed a few, feel free to go back. And then Amanda and I both mentioned the Nonprofits Unleashed group. So if you would like to join it and get support from other nonprofit professionals, there's a link for that. And so that leads me to the 3 final polls. We want to hear your ideas for making this meeting more successful. I'm going to give you a few minutes to quickly weigh in on that, to see what suggestions you have for making this meeting more successful. And please be very brutally honest. This is how we get better at Network for Good and Southwest Florida Community Foundation. We pride ourselves on being what we call learning organizations, and we know that we don't get everything right the first time, but we are absolutely committed to continuous improvement. So any feedback you can give us is going to help us make this better for the next time. With that, I'm going to launch the next question, and this one's an easy one. Not too many choices here. Do you feel more confident that you can host a virtual event after attending this training? You know, that really is the holy grail for us. You know, we want to make sure that we're not just giving you ideas, but that you feel confident that you can implement them based on what you've learned. So, you know, if you feel like you still have questions, please drop them in the question box because we would love to answer that for you. And looks like, oh, good, this is some good numbers. 92% of you say that you're more confident that you can do your virtual event. So this is great. Thank you all. And then the final question that we're going to ask, this one has to do with how likely are you to collaborate or partner with some of the organizations that attended this event? Now, I know this is a tough one because we're attending virtually, we can't see each other, and we're not able to interact directly with each other. So, you know, it may not apply so much to you, but, you know, thinking about all the Thrivability events that you attend, how easy is it and likely is it that you're going to meet another partner that you could work with? So with all that said, I'm going to pass it back to Amanda, and Amanda is going to take it away for us. Amanda?
Thank you so much, Rachel. That was such a great presentation and so inspiring to see that people are taking away ideas and they're excited to launch a virtual event themselves. So we're getting a lot of questions about if we're going to receive this presentation. And as a reminder, you will receive the recording and the presentation slides to the email that you used to register to the event. Someone is just asking if we could bring back the slide for the 3 opportunities to sign up. So I'm going to put that slide up there for a couple of minutes. And you can also find the links for those in the upper left-hand corner. And also, as Rachel had mentioned, we'll send the presentation to you, and you'll actually be able to click on all of the different examples of the virtual events, and anytime that there's a link, you'll be able to click that in the presentation as well. And we'll make sure to include all of those links in the follow-up emails as well, so that you'll all have those to view. Rachel, we do have a question here from Erin, and she's saying that she needs to know how to address fundraising challenges for 501(c)(3). We don't have the tax deductible advantage, and we need to know how to be successful despite that fact. Any recommendations you have for Erin?
You know, Erin, I would say that your people who care about the work that you're doing may not care so much about the tax advantages now, because since they changed the tax laws a couple of years ago, the threshold for tax deductibility is so high that there are not as many people that are giving to you because they get a tax deduction. So your donors will give to you whether you're a 501, even though you're not a 501(c)(3, because they care about the work that you do. Another option might be for you to partner with a 501(c)(3 organization. So if you find a donor that really does need one, because if you're able to work together and you have them receive the gift, then that's another way around that. But I'm really encouraged that, more and more people are giving, not because of the tax deduction, but just because they care about the cause. Now, that said, anybody who gives at a major gift level is probably going to want a tax deduction. So that would be an example of maybe a good connection for you to make at the Community Foundation with the Donor Services team. Because if you're able to consult with them, the Community Foundation may be able to find a way for you to work with that donor. But that's really telling you more than that is outside my wheelhouse, because I'm not a tax expert by any stretch. But, again, for those that it matters to, reach out to the Community Foundation and they may be able to find a creative solution for you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Rachel. You had mentioned a little bit earlier in your presentation about launching a multi-channel campaign for virtual events. Can you dive into that a little bit deeper, really break down what that means and share a couple of different channels that, a nonprofit can really take advantage of during this time?
Oh, absolutely, Amanda. I'd be happy to do that. So a multi-channel communication campaign is nothing more than talking to people in different media. So, for example, if you're used to sending somebody an appeal letter in the mail, that's the direct mail channel. Or if you send it via email, that's the email channel. Or if you make an appeal in social media, that's the social media channel. So when we're talking about multi-channel communications, all it means is that you're communicating with people in more than one way. And here's why this matters. Most of us, if you think about advertising, have to see something, I think it's 7 times before we take action. So if you think about a direct mail campaign that goes out, your donors sort their mail exactly the same way that you and I do. They stand next to the trash can, and it takes them about 0.3 seconds to determine whether they're actually going to open that mail or just throw it in the trash. Similarly, if they are in crazy households like mine, they have kids that check mail and leave it on a dining table for weeks, and so they may not even have seen your direct mail piece. So when you are able to send out a direct mail campaign and follow it up with emails, that's a trigger to remind the donor, oh yeah, I think I saw an envelope buried in the dining table from these guys. Maybe I should look at it. Or if you're able to do it on social media, you have to reach people where they're at. Now that said, when you're going to use a multi-channel communication strategy, you need to be careful and respectful of donors' preferences. So, for example, I always tell people, I give my email address when I do presentations, and I'll say to them, the quickest way to make sure I never give you a dime is to add me to your email list without me opting in. So, just because you have an email doesn't mean you should use it. So make sure that when you're emailing people that you've got their permission and they've opted into receiving communications from you. And also with multi-channel communications, you want to figure out what a donor's preference is, because you don't always know. So a good rule of thumb is this: whatever form they made their gift is their preferred channel of communication. So if they sent you a check in the mail, then you could guess that sending them a letter in the mail is probably going to be preferable to them than making a phone call or sending them an email. Similarly, if they donate online, it's a reasonable assumption that they're comfortable receiving information from you with email. Text messages are also a really popular way to communicate. Now this one, again, be careful. Young people, Generation Z, they love communications by text. When you get to dinosaurs like me, I am very finicky with texting. I feel like it's the last frontier for me in terms of privacy, because I get bombarded by telemarketers on my phone. I get bombarded by emails asking me to buy things. And so I tend to prefer to save my texts for people that I care about or I'm closest to. But not everybody's like me. Younger people, like my kids, would much rather get a text from you with a link to a donation page to make it easy for them to give than to get a letter in the mail or even an email, So it's important when you're using multi-channel communications to communicate with donors on the way that is most comfortable for them. One last thing that I want to say about the multi-channel communications is that each channel has an ideal length and format. So, for example, if you are sending a mail out by U.S. Postal Service, so a letter to somebody, you can have an appeal letter that's 2 pages long, front and back. But if you're sending an email communication out, usually you want those to be 250 words or less. I will say during this COVID time, you have a little more leeway because you're painting a picture for COVID and what's happening there, and donors are more engaged. But the general rule of thumb is 250 words or less. If it's a social media post, you're looking at Facebook, you probably have 20 words or 40 words before the fold, depending on how long your words are, meaning before they have to click the read more link. And if you are on Twitter, then you've only got 140 characters. Or if you're on Instagram, you only have an image and it can't have too much text, right? And so when you're thinking about creating content and multi-channel communications, it can be overwhelming, but I'll show you a quick technique for making sure that it's easy to do. So my grandmother was from Wales in the United Kingdom, and she was a real intellectual, a teacher and a librarian, and I grew up in Jamaica. And when I went to college, there was no internet, so I'm dating myself here. And the way she showed love to me, because she couldn't afford the $2 a minute that AT&T used to charge us to call each other, was she would snip articles from the newspaper and snail mail them to me, which would take 6 or 8 weeks to get to me at school. But I would see all the articles she had lovingly snipped from the newspaper. And so I coined a phrase called snippetizing. And it's a totally made-up word in honor of her because it would have driven her nuts that I invented a word. But here's what snippetizing means. You always start with the long form. So if you're going to write an appeal, start with the direct mail, which is the longest form. You have 2 pages of content. And then after you've written your appeal, go through it with a fine-tooth comb and literally look at every word and phrase and say, if I eliminated this, would it interfere with the donor understanding the call to action that I'm asking them to do? If the answer is yes, leave it in. If the answer is no, it wouldn't interfere, dump it. No extra words needed. The next thing you do is you go through and you look at each sentence and you say, if I could only highlight maybe 10 or 15 sentences out of this whole letter, which ones would I need to include in order to help the donor paint or understand what I'm trying to tell them and take the call to action? For those sentences, find a way to put them in bold or italics or underline, because people skim when they're reading. Nobody reads like a book anymore. They literally read headlines. And so when you organize your direct mail letter so that all the essential sentences are bolded, highlighted in some way, then if the reader skims, they're just going to read those and they can still get to what you want them to do on the call to action. Now you've got your direct mail piece written. Next thing you need to do is take all those sentences that you have bold, highlighted, and underlined. That's what you put in your email, which is a shortened version of it, right? So now you didn't have to do any extra work because you're literally just pulling out pieces from that direct mail and dumping it into an email. The third thing you do then is you look at your social media posts. And so you say, well, I only have 30 or 40 words. Pull out something that will create intrigue and make them want to create more. And if you want to see a group that does a fantastic job of this, there's on Facebook a group called Soy Dog, SOIDOG, like dog, the hound, Soy Dog Foundation. They are an animal rescue group in Thailand, and they do not rescue a single hound in America, but they raise $2 million a month on Facebook for their nonprofit. And it's all through social media advertising. So if you go and like their page and you look through the history that they've got there, you'll see exactly how they structure their posts. There's always a compelling image. Then there's something that tells you what the problem is, and they always have the donate link above the section of the post that would say read more. Because what happens if the reader doesn't click read more and your call to action is buried below the read more? So when you're thinking about how you convert your appeal into something for social media, you just choose the teaser copy or the main points, put it in there with a compelling image and your call to action. And then for something like Twitter, where you have 140 characters, That's kind of like whetting people's appetite and making them have to click on the link in order to figure out how the story ends. So when you think multi-channel communications, it is not a huge amount of work. It's just a matter of being smart about how you create your content so that you can snippetize it and use a little piece of it on each channel depending on how they're structured and how they play. So I hope that answered the question.
Definitely. And Rachel, I can't tell you how much I love that. I'm going to start using that, snippetize, because, I mean, even research says, I love it. Research says that an average American is exposed to between 4,000 and 10,000 pieces of marketing per day. Now, I mean, think about that. We're getting exposed to such a high volume. And so as nonprofits, we have such important missions. And it's so important to really cut through the noise and get, be straightforward and get in front of our donors' eyes. So I love that. I think that's great advice. And
well,
with that, Rachel,
Go ahead.
Oh, go ahead, Rachel.
I was just going to say, it's a technique I've practiced for a long time. And one of my favorite things in the Network for Good platform takes that advice to a whole new level. And if you are a Network for Good user, you'll see we have this video messaging. And it is the coolest thing ever. You literally can record a video from your cell phone or your laptop and send it to a donor in a text message or even in an email. And so when you're thinking multi-channel communications, don't think it has to be formal. You just have to think, how can I delight my donor? So a quick video of you helping a child read, if that's your mission, or a behind-the-scenes tour, or a, hey Amanda, I just wanted to tell you I thought about you today. How are you doing? It goes a long way. So at the end of the day, it's just about making people feel like the heroes they are.
100%. It's all about being authentic, being genuine, and especially in these times, being a friend and being there for one another. I think that's great advice. And like Rachel said, it doesn't have to be, this well-produced, crazy video. It can be just shot with your iPhone or your smartphone or whatever phone or device you have, and send it to your donors and let them know that you're there for them. Thank you so much, Rachel. And thank you so much, Tricia and the Southwest Florida Community Foundation for letting us be a part of this great workshop. We're so glad that you were able to join us today. As a reminder, you will receive the recording to this presentation as well as the slides. And don't forget that you'll be able to actually click through the slides and dive a little bit deeper into those examples that Rachel was showing us today. And with that, we hope you all have a wonderful weekend. Stay safe, and we'll see you next time. Thank you so much.
Bye, everyone. Have a good weekend.
Thanks, Tricia. Bye.